Hello and welcome to my cybersecurity channel. My name is Cordula Buck, and here you'll get the best tips on how to stay safe online. In today's video, I really want to share with you how to create highly secure passwords, what specific things you should always keep in mind to effectively use and manage those secure passwords, and the absolute best way to create really strong, unique master passwords. So let's dive right in together and find out how you can better manage your personal passwords and create incredibly secure password hashes that simply can't be easily cracked by hackers. I've already made a few notes here. First, a few basic things about managing or storing passwords. This doesn't just apply to private individuals, but actually to everyone. Yes, whether you work from home, run a business, manage a large company, or are simply a private individual. This really happens everywhere, and sometimes all I can do is shake my head. Whenever I hear that some people still actually stick their private passwords on little yellow sticky notes right onto their computer desktops, I just get goosebumps. And for a very long time, I used to just keep the classic little physical notebook where I manually wrote down every one of my passwords, simply because I was quite against using digital password managers. Today, however, I would find it to be extremely exhausting and tedious to write down every single password by hand and then enter it for each individual login manually. Back then, I thought differently at 27. And yes, it is possible that I also had significantly fewer logins back then. Perhaps I was limited just to Gmail, or there were even some various online forums already active. And yes, it really was much more convenient, or just made a lot more sense to me personally, to write those specific passwords down in my physical notebook. Not recommended. And here's another thing that's absolutely not recommended. Under no circumstances should you store passwords in Word or in Excel. I keep seeing this same thing whenever I illustrate these specific cases that big companies say, and regular everyday users do this too. I save these passwords in Word, I save them in Excel, I save them in AnyType, or I even save them in some other random program. Note-taking program, for example, in OneNote, or in the worst case, I even send them by email. My best friend in the world and all of these things. I think people know that. Perhaps you are still doing this unconsciously. And within the professional business world, it is very often the case that it simply has everything to do with personal convenience. And quite a lot of people just use simple passwords that they can very easily remember. And honestly, this is absolutely no joke. Things like summer 1, 2, 3, or perhaps our summer party, our barbecue party, or whatever, 19 something. Another very popular password used in the private sphere is I love you, or perhaps house 123. Okay. There was actually a list compiled of the most popular passwords, and hackers use this list method. The most popular passwords. The most commonly used passwords. This is the dictionary method, where they figure out what makes sense, and what people use most frequently. There was also a recent article from CT. It was only a simulation, but I assume that this really happens. And this person, the secretary, used Marienkäfer 2023 as a password. That's something I personally wouldn't have thought of, for example, but it's still a password that's relatively easy to crack. Sure, as I said, you have to think of it first, but hackers are pretty clever and can figure out passwords like that. That's one thing. And the other thing I noted down here is that it definitely makes sense to use password managers. Absolutely. There are many arguments in favor of password managers. I've already made a video about this. I clearly recommend them, Keeper or NordPass. Those are two very good password managers. There's absolutely nothing against them. Even though many people always say it absolutely has to be in Europe, it absolutely has to be RotenPass. Or another password manager like KeysPass, where you can manage your passwords yourself. I absolutely do not share that opinion. The fact is, Keeper is one of the best password managers, which I have been using for quite some time. They have very good architectural knowledge, meaning a very solid security foundation. They really manage passwords securely, have a long track record, and have excellent testimonials. And also NordPass and RoboForm, those are truly top password managers as well. And by the way, Kaspersky and Norton and all the others also offer free password managers in addition. So that's also interesting to know. You don't necessarily have to use a premium or subscription-based password manager. There are certainly several effective ways to use highly reliable and robust password managers to store and manage all of your passwords securely. Yes, to manage them securely in this case. And that's where the crucial part comes in, the master password. If this master password isn't secure, then nothing else matters. It really has to be very strong. And you also have to come up with something for it. But in the past, I made the mistake of, for example, using the construction number of the Titanic. And I'm saying this now because that's no longer the case, but just as an example, it's not necessarily bad, but it's just like that. Or for example, the construction number of the Graf Zeppelin. It's just something people could figure out. And yes, many people also use their own name or something else they can easily remember. And now comes the crucial part, a tip from a former hacker. It was from a documentary. He said you shouldn't use a single word, numbers, or special characters, but rather a complete sentence. A complete sentence that you can easily remember. Ideally, for example, a sentence from your favorite movie or one that has something to do with your favorite movie, or a sentence from your favorite fairy tale or anything else you can identify with. Something, as I said, that you can easily remember. It doesn't necessarily have to make sense. What's important is that the sentence is memorable for you and that you can really remember this master password well. And for companies, of course, it's especially important as well to know who has admin rights, who has access to this password manager, how many licenses there are for it, and does everyone know this password is posted on a bulletin board, and so on. By the way, this also applies to schools, that you check where the Wi-Fi password is, where the master password is, and where it is securely stored. And ideally, it is kept offline in a secure location, even privately. As I already mentioned in the last video, not like I did. It's an option to manage it in another password manager or in a cloud service, in this case Secure Safe, but it's not such a good option, because if this cloud can still be hacked, then the hackers would also have access to this master password. And that's why the best tip is actually to write down the master password, just the master password on paper, and keep it in a secure place. Store it there. Exactly. And then there's something else, and that concerns the password managers themselves, the LastPass hack. The LastPass hack was repeatedly in the headlines. There were a series of persistent and ongoing security problems with LastPass. And I believe it was back in 2022, as far as I know, that there was a major and highly publicized scandal when these LastPass vaults were compromised and stolen. And then various attempts were made to crack them open. And the hackers succeeded in partially cracking these vaults and stealing cryptocurrency. In other words, they managed to steal it. Several million. And then LastPass actually had access to this password manager. Point number 1. From my perspective, the absolute scandal is that everyone had access to this password manager. And what was much worse, even before 2022, was that LastPass had already been negligent with the security of its users and with the password manager itself. And only afterwards did they really invest in making LastPass more secure. Yes, of course, it's good that it's now a secure password manager, no question about it, but for me, there's always a bitter aftertaste that remains. And for me, that was actually a reason to say, as good as the website is and as good as the webinars have become, but it simply remains in the collective memory that LastPass was repeatedly in the headlines for not being a secure password manager, even though millions of people use it. And yes, the fundamental problem was simply that. As I previously mentioned, various staff members had direct access to these vaults, to all of this data in practice, and much of it was simply not encrypted in any way whatsoever. A very important point, not everything was encrypted. By way of comparison with Keeper, they encrypt everything. And for hackers, it was actually quite straightforward to break into these vaults, these digital vaults. Although relatively easy is, of course, they've been in the business for some time, that's true, but it was simply a golden opportunity. And LastPass then had a leak in the damage. So it just wasn't good to be so publicly in the press and to have to keep defending yourself, let's put it that way. And yes, I wouldn't recommend it either. There were also a lot of computer magazines that advised against using LastPass. But there are so many password management options. I don't want to give a specific recommendation here either, because there are so many different ones. It's not just the ones I've mentioned, but also numerous other options in Europe. There are the well-known password managers, there are the password managers from antivirus providers, and so on. Everyone has to decide for themselves which one suits them best and what makes sense. And then another important tip, regularly changing passwords. That's complete nonsense. That used to be a so-called insider tip. It's not true. You don't have to change passwords regularly. If you set a really strong password with Keeper or another password manager with special characters, with lowercase and uppercase letters, with at least 15 characters, preferably more than 15 characters, randomly generated, and this brings me to an important point. I've already made a short video about this, not with ChatGPT, not with Gemini, or any other AI tool. You should never let it generate these passwords. I definitely advise against it, because ChatGPT, in this case, let's take this as an example, does not generate them randomly, but instead, for example, takes something from your chats, some piece of information, and then creates, I don't know, something like my favorite game is Titanic, just to stick with this example, or since 2007 or something like that. And then it just creates a password that's easy to remember. As I said, this is just an example. And you think, oh yeah, that's great, I'll use that, I like it, ChatGPT must know what it's doing. That must be good. And it can only be secure. Absolutely not. Only those from the password manager, the randomly generated ones that are hard to guess, that have strong special characters, as I said, uppercase and lowercase letters, the complicated ones. And you can always see how strong these passwords are. There is also an interactive online testing tool where you can test it to see what it looks like and exactly how strong and secure it really is. Yes, but it's also important to know that you can enter this password, but you really and truly should never actually enter this password. According to this online tool, password testing, so you can just type test password strength into Google, because when you enter your password there, you're entrusting it to that provider, to that cloud, and in doing so, you're giving away your master password. You can use a similar master password. Test it to see if this master password actually makes sense. I entered mine, well, a similar master password, and it would take 30 billion, no, that's not even enough, 30 trillion years to crack it. I'm just saying a number now, but I think it really was trillions, 30 trillion years. That's how long it would take to crack this master password. Billions are pretty good too, but trillions are obviously better. 30 trillion years to crack this master password. And as you can see, that makes absolutely no sense at all. And now to conclude, I just want to mention something else important. It really doesn't make sense to try to crack this master password in 30 trillion years. Do you know anyone who will live that long? I don't. So that means if quantum computers, which already exist to some extent, become commonplace and are able to handle more and more tasks, or if AI becomes even more intelligent, then it's quite possible that hackers will have new ways to crack these passwords. And by the way, for hackers, it's the easiest thing to get into a company, or even into a computer if you use a weak password. And that's the first point of entry where hackers get in. There actually aren't as many backdoors or hidden doors as hackers try to find to get into a computer. To hack it or to get into some program, first they need a login, whether it's a Wi-Fi password or a login, for example, to a website. And here, they often guess these passwords using the dictionary method based on the word lists I just mentioned, the most popular passwords, and proceed with this brute force method. Yes, so they try, as the saying goes, trial and error. And most of the time, they're very successful with it. As I said, the article from CT really surprised me. He tried out various things. He was about to give up at 97% when this tool recommended that he try this and that, Ladybug, in combination with a certain year. And this master password, this login for the email account was correct. And from this email account, he had access to all the company's computers. And that's how it works. And it was the same with many other hacks in the past. For example, with NVIDIA, I think it was NVIDIA or Sony or Microsoft, I can't remember exactly. In any case, it was about the Xbox. I think it was Microsoft, where these hackers, young hackers as you can see, guessed this master password and thus gained access to numerous other accounts and partner companies through the master passwords. Not simply because they were so smart and said, now we can hack the computer and install some kind of malware. People are just dumb and click on the email and then download it. No, it was because they guessed this master password. That's why it's so important. To use a secure password that's hard to guess, that makes it difficult for hackers, so they say, I give up, it's not worth it anymore, this is so complicated, I can't do it. That's the whole point, but now I've somehow lost my train of thought. It was about the topic of quantum computers. Quantum computers are coming, no question about it, in the next 10 to 20 years, in my opinion. But they won't be like regular computers. They will solve tasks that humans and normal computers cannot solve. And of course, it will also be the case that malicious hackers who have already stored this data will try to use these quantum computers to decrypt and break into certain digital vaults. Like, for example, with LastPass, but it could also be other similar services, and they will definitely succeed with it. Because it will be the case that this normal encryption technology, this military encryption technology, I don't know exactly what it's called in detail, but it's a military encryption method with 5-6 bits or something like that. In any case, it's the standard encryption used by most password managers. That's the standard for all password managers. And I think even Putin always uses this classic military standard encryption. And this military standard encryption can be cracked by any quantum computer in a few hours, if not even in a few minutes. Now, of course, you don't necessarily have to worry. Like I said, it's just speculation about the future. But you should think beyond that. You should really consider, how well are we prepared? How secure are my passwords? What can I do to use your passwords and manage these passwords securely? And what is much more important from my point of view is to actually ask ourselves, do passwords even make sense for us anymore? Shouldn't we start thinking about passkeys? I'm not a huge fan of passkeys, yes, I admit that openly and honestly. I find them a bit forced, to be honest, but they do make sense. They make sense in that they partially replace two-factor authentication, from my point of view. Because, of course, that's an additional layer of protection with password managers and also with other tools, for example, with Microsoft Login. Activating this two-factor authentication and saying, okay, now we receive a code sent by email or SMS. And now we can confirm that it's us, that it's our company, that it's my home office, that it's me by means of this code, and then I can log in. But I have also had the problem in the past that I locked myself out of LastPass. I'm not even joking right now. I was trying to enter my security code and I couldn't remember which email address it was. I had forgotten what the verification code was, or rather, I had the completely wrong SIM card inside the phone or something like that. It was just a total mess in any case. I couldn't use this method then. And with that, the attempt to return to LastPass had failed. I wasn't exactly ungrateful about it. I had just tested it once, saved 5 passwords there, and set up two-factor authentication. But the crucial thing, of course, is that you know which email address you use to log in, with what number, with what mobile phone number, that you can receive this SMS or this email, and then, of course, also confirm that it's really you. And if it doesn't work and the mobile number is outdated or the email address no longer exists, then logically you also can't log in. And as I said, it makes a lot of sense because it's an additional layer of confirmation. But it will be the case that quantum computers will be so intelligent that they can bypass all of this, and that hackers will then actually have the ability to break into any computer and any business relatively easily. And that's why it's so important to keep educating yourself regularly on this topic. Not just on the topic of password security or online security, but in general on the topic of time security. And if you want to learn more about this, then definitely stay tuned, subscribe to my channel, feel free to follow me here on YouTube for additional content or visit my blog. And I'm glad that you lent me your ear again today, and we'll hear each other in the